Good
I
morning.
read something where I believe for 34 consecutive years, an Elliott or an Earnhardt has been the sport's most popular driver by the fans. And Chase Elliott has been voted the most popular driver, I believe, 7 years running. Chase, thank you very much for the time. First of all, why do you think that fans respond to you the way that they do?
Well, yeah, thanks for having me, first off. It was a lot of fun. You showing that clip from Bristol the other day, giving some tickets away. A lot of excitement up there, but yeah, I don't know. The fans have been just really good to me throughout my career, and I think a lot of that comes from my family's history in the sport. My dad had a great run, back in his day, and I've enjoyed trying to carry that flag, I guess, in a manner that I think they would want it to be done, and also kind of make it my own, I guess, at the same time. So it's been a fun road, and honestly, this has been a lot of fun. Thanks for having me again. This is I'm a huge baseball fan, big Braves fan, as you know, and exciting to help promote the Speedway Classic at Bristol here in August. Yeah,
you're a native of Dawsonville, Georgia, and obviously that is Braves country. But Chase, really, the entire Southeast is Braves country. Yes, I mean it's not just exclusive to the state of Georgia or the Atlanta area.
No, it's not, and at least in my experience from growing up, I think a lot of that has to do with the TBS coverage. Back in the day, a lot of people you couldn't watch other teams, right? So everyone was watching the Braves. So I meet a lot of people across the country that are huge Braves fans just because of that reason alone. And certainly around hometown team, you get it a lot. But I have always been surprised traveling, and we get to see a lot of the country, just how many people that you would never expect, just from random areas that are huge Braves fans too, and always express that to me. So yeah, pretty cool.
Who was your guy, Chase?
Chipper was my guy, for sure, which I kind of, don't get me wrong, I was a little late. I got on board a little late.
So you're more baby Braves like McCann and Kelly Johnson and those guys coming through?
That was about the time when those guys were kind of in their heyday. Jeff Francoeur and Chipper was getting there towards the end of his career. But yeah, that was just so much fun, and you could tell the vibe inside that locker room, in the clubhouse just seemed like a team that you would want to go play for. Like it was just, they were boys, they were having fun. And I think a lot of those guys still hang out and play golf together and that sort of thing.
So you were at the Peachtree Tavern?
I was not there, but
just making sure.
I was probably a little young for that. Yeah.
Chase, this is the first ever baseball game at the Speedway. What do players need to know about playing there as opposed to a traditional field?
Yeah, well, you're gonna have to ask them. I am not a baseball player for sure, just a casual fan. So I'm not going to act like I know anything about the game from that perspective. But I do think the visuals would certainly have to be different. And that was, Chipper and I we got to go up and kind of do the advanced promotion for the race a few months ago, and his first thought was like, man, this looks really short. These guys are basically going to have the opportunity to just hit home runs whenever they want, which would be interesting. But it was also difficult to see the exact layout because some of the buildings in the infield are going to have to be removed, or at least part of them. But I would have to imagine, the batter's eye and kind of how all that stuff works is the visual representation of what those guys are used to seeing would be difficult to adjust to. But again, you have to ask those boys when it comes around.
Chase, as baseball fans, all of us love to go to the different ballparks, whether it's PNC or Fenway or Wrigley. They all have different characteristics. What's different about Bristol, and what are some of your favorite tracks that you like to race on?
Oh, yeah. Cool.
Yeah, it's a great question. They change it, and for us, we go to a different track every week, and every track has its own characteristic, whether there's a certain bump in an area of the track, or just the track size, or how much banking it has, or if it's, some places are almost completely flat. So obviously the distance of the tracks are a lot, they can change a ton. Bristol is one of the shortest tracks we go to, and this weekend we're going to Talladega, which is one of the longest. So there's all kinds of detail, in all that we analyze, and obviously with experience and being around, you kind of get used to going to different places. But there's a lot of little details that you can dive into and get pretty in depth with.
Chase, we have a track around these parts. It's called Route 3. And, it's not great. So when I'm driving, or when you're driving on the highway and someone's going 20 in the left-hand lane, are you wanting to bump, a little bit?
Put them in a wall, Chase. Put them in a wall.
How do you combat that?
I will say that fortunately for me, I can get it out on the weekends. But I will say that I have been prone to getting frustrated on the highway too. At something similar to that. If you're stacking up the left lane, that's
right.
like just be courteous.
Yeah.
And get out of the way.
It's
if you want to go slow, that's fine.
That's right.
But,
that's right. It's a lane for passing.
I didn't know that. You told me that last week. I didn't know.
You didn't?
No.
Are you serious, Shots?
No.
Get a hold of yourself.
Ask him your question, because I think
the
I want to know if you pee in your pants on the track. That's what I really want to know.
You're in there for hours doing, Mach 2 around the track, an inch away from. They say hitting a baseball is the hardest thing to do in sports. I don't know how you guys are able.
There's a physicality.
Yeah,
Chase,
take me
right?
inside the car. Like, what are you thinking? What are you feeling in that moment?
The bathroom question is extremely popular. So, yeah, the good news for us is the environment inside the car is really hot. So we sweat a lot, thank goodness, because otherwise you would certainly have a problem. So it kind of offsets, or at least you hope it does.
Wait, time out. The sweat upsets the pee? Is that what you're telling me?
It's science, Lauren.
Yeah, think about it now. If you're outside sweating and you're not, drinking water, then
you're not gonna.
You're good.
Yeah.
You're good. You're gonna last way longer that way. But it's not an end-all, be-all. You do have to be careful with that. So that is a thought process for sure. But yeah, the environment inside the car is just, a lot of times people ask, well, how do you train, or what do you do to prepare? And it's always a really difficult thing to explain, because there's not a lot of other activities that you do where you don't necessarily have a lot of physical movement, but your heart rate is extremely high and the environment is also extremely hot. So it's kind of a tough thing to train for, just because of those two reasons. But a lot of what we do is heart rate control, truthfully, and just being comfortable in the environment. And a lot of it is mental, I feel like, as well, because you can be out there and sweating, and you just have to tell yourself you're cold some days, because it can get pretty toasty in there.
What'd you eat for breakfast today, Chase?
I had a banana this morning. I'm running off a singular banana right now, so we'll probably not the best move on race day, but for a media tour,
there you go.
We'll roll with the banana.
Well, thank you very much for joining us and handing out those tickets there, and your recent visit in Bristol, Tennessee, and we look forward to watching you race at the big track this weekend at Talladega.
Yeah, me too. Thanks for having me on, and I'm excited to watch the game in Bristol coming up here soon.
Dodger Stadium filling up before Game 1 of the 1988 World Series. Hi, everybody. Bob Costas along with Marv Albert.
Thoughts and images that went through your mind as you rounded the bases? Well, I just kept telling myself these are the type of circumstances you enjoy most, and you perform even better under these conditions.
Center, look out! Do you believe it? It's gone! To the wall. And what happens here? He contends that a fan reaches up and touches it. But Richie Garcia says no. The 0-1 pitch. A liner off Nagy's glove into center field. The Florida Marlins have won the World Series. Unleash all the superlatives. They all seem to apply.
Hello, Bob Costas through the years there, and our own Bob Costas honored with the Lifetime Achievement Award from the Baseball Digest. Other recipients, Willie Mays, Joe Torre, Dusty Baker, Vin Scully. That's a good group to be in. Bob Costas back with us now. Congratulations, Bob. That's nice to see.
Thank you very much. And like you, I'm sure, I grew up reading Baseball Digest.
Oh, no question. Yeah. Oh, yeah. I loved it when it was small.
Yeah.
Like the little square.
Like the old Reader's Digest, which fans of a certain age will recall. Now it's a glossier, full-size magazine.
Still do great work.
It still does the old school things, the rules, questions,
that's right.
Trivia questions.
Wasn't it Ask Red? Ask Red Foley? What was that thing?
Red Foley was a legendary official scorer.
Ask Red, right? You had that, right?
Yeah. How do you rule this or that? So they got the old school touches, but all the features on what's going on now in baseball, it's really good.
Right. Oh, good. It gives us an excuse to talk about your career. What was the first? I don't know the answer to this, because I know you called basketball games out of Syracuse. First baseball game that you called, where?
I did a couple of minor league games on KMOX in St. Louis during the strike in 1981, because they were just looking to fill time. And the Cardinals had an affiliate in Springfield, Illinois. I did a handful of games. But actually, prior to that, in 1980, I did 3 or 4 games for NBC. I just joined NBC. So the backup games of the week. And on one of them, I was with Bobby Valentine, and it was the second to last day of the regular season, the Yankees and Tigers. And the Yankees' magic number was 1. Meanwhile, the Expos are playing the Phillies at the same time, and it's the same situation. Phillies are going to clinch the East, and it rained for 4 hours. So all of a sudden, our game is going to the whole country. And nobody outside St. Louis and my immediate family tree has any idea who I am. And every time I cross,
Who's this kid?
Every time I cross paths with Bobby Valentine, he remembers that I said, apparently, because he remembers it, Bobby, we're going to the world. And I thought, well, if I screw this up, I'm going back home to St. Louis.
Did you always want to call it baseball specifically? Is that feeling, or where do you think you were headed?
Well, baseball was always my favorite sport. I like basketball a lot. I loved the NBA on NBC in the 90s. It was a golden era, and the way NBC covered it in that Michael Jordan decade was terrific. But baseball's always been the one that was closest to my heart.
You were, again, it's even hard to envision, but in the late 80s, mid to late 80s, you were doing your sideline reporter. So you would be in locker rooms, famously in the Red Sox locker room in 1986. I know I've heard you talk about that, but it is the amount of pathos involved with that, they were going to win and win it all, and you were there waiting. Who was in that room? Who was in the clubhouse?
The great writer, Jimmy Breslin, who became a general columnist, but also covered a lot of sports.
Yeah.
And he said something that's generally true. The better stories are in the loser's locker room. So here it is, 1986. The Mets had won, the Miracle Mets, in 1969. The Red Sox still hadn't won since 1918. And they came from behind, down 3-1, came from behind to break the hearts of the Angels in the LCS to get to the World Series. Now they're on the verge of winning it. 2 out, nobody on. They're up by 2 runs, bottom of the 10th.
It's happening.
I have long since gone into the Red Sox clubhouse anticipating a couple of things. Not just the post-game champagne and everything, but this is the first broadcast ever of a Red Sox. There's no radio of the World Series in 1918. So the historic aspect beyond the immediate aspect was something that was running through my head. And I remember as the inning unfolded and the game became tied, I said, what do I do now? And Mike Weissman was the executive producer, and he said in my ear, and I won't even clean it up, get your ass out of there as fast as you possibly can. And so when the ball went through Buckner's legs, they somehow, it was like a Broadway show where they break the set down in like record time. Everything, all evidence that we had been there. Frail Mrs. Yawkey had come in along with Commissioner Uberoth. The championship trophy was on a little rolling table. All evidence that we had been there. Whisked away. And I slip out a side door. And as the Red Sox come traipsing, ashen-faced, down the tunnel from the dugout to the visitors' clubhouse, no one says a word except one word was uttered as a bat was smashed against the cement wall. And that one word began with an F.
That was, And then you went and talked to the Mets.
No, Marv Albert was with the Mets on that side. And then I wound up with the Mets a couple nights later. There was a rainout, Game 7.
Right, that's right.
And then they played Game 7 on a Monday night. And get this, the Giants were playing Washington on Monday Night Football. And the 7th game of the World Series got a rating in the 30s. And the football game got a rating in single digits. That's when the world was as it should have been.
Right, exactly. By the way, that can happen again. I know football's king and all that. By the way, they can switch back again in a generation. How are clubhouses different now? Because I see a huge difference. Do you see a huge difference from 1980s clubhouses players?
Well, players are more aware now. They have their own accounts on X or Instagram or whatever it may be. They're surrounded by more handlers. I think it's harder, not impossible. I think beat writers and the local broadcasters can establish a relationship with the players. But more than beyond, hi, how you doing? There isn't as much for a national broadcaster because you're just not around them as much as in the past.
It was rougher, though, back then, too, right? I mean, it was rougher, and the columnists were rougher.
Oh, yeah.
Right? I mean, columnists, you think of Dick Young, Dan Shaughnessy was on the show yesterday, but columnists who would say something that might not be flattering, right? Now, sometimes it could be unfair, but it was a more interesting baseball world, I thought.
And, you know, Dick Young actually pioneered going into the clubhouse for quotes after the games. He did this in the late 40s and in the early 50s. Generally, he just wrote the game story from on high. And if he had written something critical, he made it a point to show up the very next day. And walk right up to that manager, right up to that player. Dick was kind of a pugnacious guy.
Yes.
You know, he wrote in that punchy sort of, if Ernest Hemingway was a sports writer, and Hemingway sometimes did turn his attention to sports, mentioned DiMaggio, the old man in the sea and whatnot. But if Hemingway had been a sports writer, he would have written like Dick Young.
You're not calling play-by-play this year.
No, or any time after.
How much do you miss that?
I knew it was time. You know.
No, but how much do you miss it?
I think I'll miss being around the game, but I wasn't around it as much anyway because we did a handful of showcase games, handful of postseason games. You know, I miss talking to the players, the managers more so than that because they're closer now in age to me than the players. You know, the players may know who I am. I remember when Bryce Harper broke in, he was like 20 years old, and he said hi to me before I could say hi to him. But he's unusually aware for a young guy of the history of the game. You know, back in the 80s and 90s, I could actually pal around with some of the players. Now I'm closer in age to the managers. But unless Bruce Bochy decides to retire, I'm older than all of them. So
got to keep him in the game then. Do you want to drop back in, though? Call a game?
You know, I don't think so. I don't think so.
I would love to listen to you call a game again. I'm going to tell you honestly. I know you said it even on Central. You were saying that I'm not what I used to be. It's like, no, but you're still above where most everybody else is.
I talked to you about it a couple of years ago. I just felt like maybe, look, it's not brain surgery, but there's elements to it that the average person doesn't understand, nor should they. Because if you're good at it, you should make it look relatively easy. The way I did it, was different than the way most people did it. At my best, it was a combination of things. You're calling the plays accurately. You're working in some background, a little bit of history, a little bit of humor, the occasional reference from outside baseball. And if those elements come together properly, then it's a good recipe. I didn't think I could as deftly blend all those elements. When some people might say, you know, that's an old school way of doing it, shouldn't do it that way anymore. Sometimes it isn't the song, it's the singer. The song was still the right song as far as I was concerned. I just couldn't sing it quite as well. And I just couldn't couldn't bear not meeting my own standard.
Yeah, no, you're too hard on yourself. Though. Again, you're an interesting listen. You're always an interesting listen out there, right? You're still overqualified for that job.
Well, my decision was based on my own standard, not on any outside noise or anything like that. But as I said to D-Row, players have an advantage. They have a lifetime batting average. My lifetime batting average is pretty darn good, but I couldn't hit close to that average toward the end, and that happens to a lot of guys.
Neither could Ted Williams, but a 344. That sounds about right. You'd take a 344?
I'd take 315.
I think you're more like a 344,
okay.
Bob. Congratulations on the award.
Thank you.
Always good talking baseball with you. Bob Costas here.